Hello everyone. Today I want to talk to you about Saudi Arabia elevating Trump and China further increasing its purchase of Russian oil. In addition, the United States has revised its warning regarding chips for Huawei, but China is not buying it. The Ministry of Commerce has strongly criticized the United States, accusing it of undermining the China-U.S. trade agreement. A dispute has erupted between China and the U.S. over the U.S. blocking Huawei's Ascend chips. On May 10, the U.S. Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security issued a bulletin revoking some of the export control measures on advanced computing semiconductors that were implemented during the Biden administration, namely the so-called Biden AI proliferation rules. However, at the same time, it released guidelines for the export control of artificial intelligence chips, stating that the use of Huawei's Ascend chips anywhere constitutes a violation of U.S. export control regulations. Upon seeing these guidelines, China strongly criticized the U.S., calling it an act of long-arm jurisdiction and a typical example of unilateral bullying. The Chinese side firmly opposes this. China's AI industry also stated that the U.S. guidelines are completely unreasonable. The US has already banned the sale of high-performance AI chips to Chinese companies, but now it has issued new guidelines stating that any company using Huawei's Ascend chips is in violation of US regulations. So what chips can Chinese AI companies use now? Moreover, if Chinese AI companies are using Chinese chips on Chinese soil, how could that possibly violate US regulations? The US knows it is in the wrong. In the press release issued by the U.S. Department of Commerce on May 12 regarding the AI chip export control guidelines, it originally stated in a tough tone that using Huawei's Ascend chips anywhere would violate U.S. export control regulations. It was revised to warn the industry that using advanced Chinese computer chips, including some Huawei Ascend chips, carries risks. However, China still does not accept this new wording from the U.S. Department of Commerce. According to a Reuters report, a senior spokesperson from China's Ministry of Commerce, who declined to be named, pointed out at a press conference on the evening of May 20 that the U.S. Department of Commerce had adjusted its language in the May 12 press release on AI chip export control guidelines. In response, China has continued to express its protest to the U.S. through multiple levels of the China-U.S. economic consultation mechanism, emphasizing that this action still seriously undermines the consensus reached during the high-level China-U.S. talks in Geneva. They have demanded that the U.S. correct its mistake. The spokesperson from the Ministry of Commerce further emphasized that although the U.S. has adjusted the wording of its announcement, the discriminatory nature of the control measures themselves has not changed and continues to distort the essence of the market. The spokesperson also warned the U.S. that tripping others up will not make itself run faster, and in the end it will only end up stumbling over its own actions. The US has abused export controls, using unfounded accusations to restrict China's chip products, and has even interfered with Chinese companies' use of their own chips domestically. The US is overreaching, which is a typical act of unilateral bullying. China firmly opposes this. China urges the US to immediately stop these discriminatory measures, uphold the consensus reached during the high-level talks in Geneva, and strengthen communication through the China-US economic and trade consultation mechanism, manage differences, and work towards establishing a sustainable, long-term, and mutually beneficial bilateral economic and trade relationship. Let me first give a brief summary. First, the United States can warn the industry about the risks of using advanced Chinese computer chips without any evidence. On what grounds does the US issue such warnings against Chinese companies? Even after revisions, the US warning remains unreasonable and excessive. Second, the Chinese side's warning has escalated to the point of emphasizing that such actions seriously undermine the consensus reached during the high-level China-US talks in Geneva, meaning that if the US continues, it will threaten the Geneva consensus. In other words, it means that if the US mishandles this, it is essentially overturning the China-US consensus. China is demanding that the US withdraw the relevant warning. The US targeting Huawei's Ascend AI chips is related to its money-making strategies in the Middle East. Judging from the path of US policy implementation, the AI export control rules introduced during the Biden era will restrict the export of advanced American AI chips to countries like Saudi Arabia. Now, while Trump is abolishing the AI diffusion rules from the Biden era, he is introducing even more targeted and exclusive measures, imposing a global embargo on Huawei's Ascend chips. He requires any country wishing to use these chips to obtain US approval, which is essentially an attempt to drive Huawei's Ascend chips out of the Middle Eastern and even the global market. At the same time, the United States has reached agreements with Middle Eastern countries such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, allowing the export of more than 1 million high-end NVIDIA Hone 100 AI chips to the Middle East. Saudi AI company Huawei has already announced that it will work with NVIDIA to build an artificial intelligence factory in Saudi Arabia. Middle Eastern countries plan to invest over $200 billion in the next 5 years to build AI infrastructure. This creates a huge market opportunity for American semiconductor companies. If the Middle East fully adopts American chips, it will create a buffer zone that isolates Chinese technology exports, serving as a model for how to exclude China's high-tech products. The United States is eager to make money, but it doesn't have much left that it can sell. Weapons and AI chips are the most presentable things the US has, so naturally, it wants to exclude China and take as much of the market as possible. But China is no pushover either. In addition to warning the United States about potentially violating the Geneva Tariff Agreement, it has also begun to put pressure on Saudi Arabia. A piece of news from Russia has caught people's attention. On May 19, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Novak announced that Russia is prepared to increase its annual oil supply to China by 2.5 million tons via Kazakhstan, and stated that this was a request from the Chinese side, which Russia is willing to fulfill. Novak told the media that day that this was proposed by the Chinese side, so specific technical solutions need to be introduced. To this end, the Russian oil pipeline transport company must develop a list of technical solutions for expanding exports through Kazakhstan, and specific work needs to be carried out in the field of pipeline transportation. They are currently following up on this matter. In early May, the Russian government approved a draft protocol amendment with the Chinese government, allowing the oil supply cap to Western Chinese refineries to be raised from 10 million tons to 12.5 million tons, with the supply period extended up to 2034. Novak has stated that compared to last year, Russia will increase its supply of oil, pipeline natural gas, and liquefied natural gas to China this year. China and Russia have made progress in negotiations on the Power Siberia 2 gas pipeline. Chinese companies have also shown interest in the Ust-Luga liquefied natural gas project, with specific shares to be determined through negotiations. China is the world's largest crude oil buyer. In 2024, China's crude oil imports amounted to 2.3 trillion yuan, with Russia being the top source of crude oil imports for our country. Last year, the volume of crude oil imports rose to 110 million tons. China's crude oil imports account for 19.2%. Saudi Arabia ranked second, accounting for 14.7% of imports last year, while Malaysia was third, with an import share of 11.8%. The United States, on the other hand, ranks 11th among China's crude oil import sources, accounting for 1.9% of imports. Even between China and Russia, these longtime friends, there are still some disputes regarding oil imports. Earlier this year, there were reports from the Russian side expressing concerns that the prices for oil and natural gas exported to China were too low. Later, according to TASS, from January to July this year, China imported only 18.47 million tons of oil from Russia, a year-on-year decrease of 12.6%. Reuters reported that Russian oil companies have started to avoid Russian oil, with 2 importers stopping purchases of Russian oil altogether, and another 2 reducing their procurement volumes as they need to assess compliance in light of the recent US sanctions imposed on Russia. However, it now appears that the numbers China and Russia discussed regarding oil prices have already been settled. China has also requested that the cap on oil supplies from Western Russia to the Chinese Communist Party be raised from 10 million tons to 12.5 million tons. Although the additional 2.5 million tons is not a huge amount, it does indicate that China is inclined to increase its purchases of Russian oil. This information was even released by Russia. The target is quite obviously Saudi Arabia, China's second largest oil supplier. This can be analyzed from several perspectives. First, the United States has a clear plan. It wants Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries to significantly increase their purchases of American weapons and AON chips, and also to completely reject Huawei's Ascend chips so that the US can make exclusive profits in the Middle East. Second, Saudi Arabia is eager to improve its relationship with the United States. Saudi Crown Prince Salman was boycotted by Biden due to his alleged involvement in the murder of journalist Khashoggi. During Biden's term, their relationship with the United States was very poor. Now that Trump is in office, naturally they are putting Trump on a pedestal. During one of Trump's visits, Saudi Arabia pledged to buy $142 billion worth of arms from the United States. In fact, during Trump's first term, in 2017, the US and Saudi Arabia also signed an arms sales agreement worth $110 billion, covering missile defense systems, warships, fighter jets, and various other equipment. At the time, Trump also said that over the next 10 years, Saudi Arabia would purchase $350 billion worth of arms from the United States. Afterwards, Trump kept boasting about this, claiming he was the world's top salesman. It's now been 8 years since that agreement, but in reality, the value of arms the US has delivered to Saudi Arabia is less than $50 billion, which is under 12% of the original 10-year target. However, now the Saudi Crown Prince Salman is once again cooperating with Trump by hyping things up first, then making large-scale purchases of American arms. In addition, the US has asked Saudi Arabia to boycott Huawei chips, and Saudi Arabia seems to be going along with it submissively. Third, China's response is a full-scale counterattack. China's warning is essentially telling the US, do you not want the Vietnam-Asia agreement anymore? If you keep playing this game to the end, the agreement will just be scrapped. China is also essentially telling Saudi Arabia, I am your major customer. If you fully side with the United States, then don't blame me for buying more Russian crude oil. That's how the world works its all a game, and it's a naked display of strength. Countries without power can only stand on the sidelines on the world stage.